Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. I'm particularly excited about today's interview. I've been waiting actually for a long time to capture our next guest, who is Gareth Gore, a financial journalist and editor with close to 2 decades of experience, who has reported from over 25 countries, covered the biggest financial stories. He has a podcast called The Syndicate, which tells the behind-the-scenes stories of some of the biggest financial deals in history. He's written for Bloomberg, Reuters, International Financing Review. And we're talking today about a really important book called Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. This is a hot potato, and I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to chat with you about it because I've known about Opus Dei for decades as a cult expert. And, this is a group that thinks the Pope is satanic and, anyway, we'll get into it. But you started this journey from the financial end, right? With a bank that you researched. Tell us how you got interested in this story and let's get into it. We'll have a lot of fun.
Well, first of all, Steve, thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. I know you've had your own run-ins with Opus Dei over the years, and I'm sure over the course of today's podcast we can talk a bit about that. But yes, to answer your question, I got into this completely by accident. I knew next to nothing about Opus Dei when I was coming into this, and I certainly wasn't looking to write a story about Opus Dei. Basically, to cut a long story short, a bank in Spain collapsed in 2017, and I, as a financial reporter, was sent to cover the story. Initially, it looked like any other bank collapse, and we've had many of them over the past kind of 15 years or so. But the more I dug, the less sense it all seemed to make, and the road started to lead me to Opus Dei. And basically, over the course of 4 or 5 years, I just dug into this more and more and discovered quite an unexpected story.
Yeah, follow the money is often the way that destructive cults get outed, frankly, and criminal activity gets exposed. I'll just say that I started getting calls from families whose kids got recruited into Opus Dei and they were experiencing a radical personality change and excessive amounts of time and money and attention. And so I applied my BITE model of authoritarian control to this organization, and it's up on the main website that I'm aware of called odan.org, ODAN. They put up the BITE model to warn people this is not normal Catholicism. This is a secretive prelature within the Catholic Church. One of the earlier popes gave it its special status, but it was a cult operating within. And I have more stories to tell, but I want to hear you because I want people to really pay attention to this book and get it and read it and share it.
So people, I mean, as you know, Steve, people have been trying to blow the whistle about Opus Dei for decades now. I mean, even in Spain, in fascist Spain in the 1960s, there were groups kind of allied to the regime that were basically calling out Opus Dei for what they really were. In the 70s, in places like Australia, even at Columbia University in New York, you had students who were spotting, real warning signals about this organization and trying to tell the world. You had groups of parents in New York in the 80s, some of whom wrote a book about the methods and techniques that these people were using. And you just mentioned there, I think in the 90s, ODAN was set up as an organization. There are others as well. I mean, there's a big website for former members in Spanish that's called Opus Libros, that's been going for many years, that has testimonies, really horrifying testimonies from hundreds, if not thousands of individuals. And more recently on Reddit, there's a community has formed that's dedicated to exposing the organization. And hopefully with my book, I can draw attention to the many, many stories out there of people.
Yeah. So after we record this and we put it out as a podcast, we also do a blog and we do links to resources. So we'll put links to other books that have been done in the past. I think I have at least a half a dozen.
Mm-hmm.
I've interviewed Eileen Johnson. I've done other stories on Opus Dei over the years. And I want to state early on that some of the most vocal critics are Catholics and Catholic priests who really see this as a smear on the Mother Church. So it's not just outsiders saying this is a cult. This is people who are devoted Catholics and theologians who are saying this is a mind control cult.
Absolutely. And even the Pope has begun to take action against Opus Dei. So in the past few years, he's made 2 personal decrees, which basically have put Opus Dei on warning. He's ordered them to rip up its statutes and to start afresh. And what's happening is it's a very delicate kind of political dance. He's basically put them on notice. He's told them to sort themselves out. But he's not doing it publicly. He's not doing it openly. He's doing it in a very delicate way because he knows that Opus Dei, he knows that the church is divided, and there are many people within the Catholic Church who are very supportive of Opus Dei, who see it as a kind of bastion of conservatism against the more liberal outlook that Francis has.
Yep.
So yeah, he's needing, even the Pope is kind of needing to be very careful about reining in this organization.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that Sebastian Sal, who's a former member and an attorney in Argentina, is representing a whole group of victims of Opus Dei suing for trafficking. And that's ongoing, and that's part of the political drama. But before we go further, I really would like you to flesh out for my listeners the money. So there was this bank, all right, Banco Popular. Tell us about what you discovered initially that got you so fascinated by this.
So, I mean, for a number of decades, from the late 50s until 2003 or 2004, this bank was effectively run by a guy called Luis Valls Taberner, who was what they call a numeri member of Opus Dei. So this is kind of the elite core of Opus Dei. These are people who have given their lives to the movement. They've taken these vows of chastity, poverty, and critically, obedience.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a numeri member of Opus Dei. He was also the chairman of this bank. And the book tells the story of how he and a group of fellow members of Opus Dei basically hijacked this bank in the 1950s, and how over the years they turned it into a kind of cash machine for Opus Dei. And it's impossible to really kind of figure out exactly how much Opus Dei managed to extract from the bank. But what we do know for sure is that Luis Valls Taberner, he set up 3 non-profit foundations in Spain, and over a number of decades, he transferred almost $1 billion from the bank to these 3 foundations. And these 3 foundations were critical in financing Opus Dei operations around the world, from Argentina to the Philippines, all across Africa, Europe, the United States. These foundations helped Opus Dei to expand and helped it to recruit more and more members into its clutches.
So they were front groups, basically. From my cult perspective, they were the other shell companies to do the recruitment, indoctrination to infiltrate media, and cover up sexual crimes. We know of at least one in Washington, D.C. with McCloskey, where a woman was given a substantial amount of money because of his inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the way that Opus Dei has operated for much of its history. It sets up these companies, these charities. Um, Officially, legally speaking, it has nothing at all to do with them. But in practice, that's a complete lie. I mean, I've spoken to a number of people who have been directors of these companies who've told me they're told precisely what to do. I mean, I remember speaking to one guy in Spain who was a director of a number of these companies who told me that on a number of occasions he was presented with minutes of meetings that he'd supposedly attended, um, and asked to basically sign off on the fact that he'd been there at this meeting, made all these decisions when this hadn't happened at all. So these are kind of front guys, fall guys, and I guess it does it for a couple of reasons. One is that it gives it whenever something goes wrong, whenever there's accusations of abuse or manipulation or criminality, Opus Dei can just simply wash its hands and say, this has absolutely nothing to do with us. But it's also a way of, I guess, hiding the breadth of the organization. It's impossible for someone on the outside to piece together where it's operating, how it's operating. I think in the United States alone, and the United States is not even a large country for Opus Dei. It's probably like its fourth or fifth or sixth largest
Mm-hmm.
country.
Mm-hmm.
In the US alone, I pieced together, I think it was 100 different nonprofits that are directly linked to Opus Dei, with about $1 billion in assets between them. Yeah, I mean, and if that's the way things are in the United States, you can only imagine what things are like in Spain or Italy, where its reach is much broader.
Right. So what I want to say now is, I was in the Moonies cult, which is how I got interested in this whole cult phenomenon and brainwashing phenomenon. And when I got out of the Moonies after a near-fatal van crash and a voluntary deprogramming, not because I had doubts, but because I wanted to prove I wasn't in a cult, I was approached by a congressional subcommittee investigation into Korean CIA activities in the United States that had named the Moonies as one of 10 points for covert operations. So they interviewed me. I gave them all of my documents from being a leader in the group. And their final report, I'll keep this short, they said, we found such a huge organization with hundreds of different names that we recommend an interagency task force be set up. We recommend, instead of calling it the Unification Church, we call it the Moon Organization, because all of these hundreds of entities are following one point of information and direction from the Messiah and his leadership. And so this notion of front groups that have different roles that obscure their identity to the public is part and parcel of the cult playbook. When you're doing nefarious criminal activities, you try to cover it up so the light of day can't shine on it. A couple of quick stories. So when my Cult of Trump book came out in 2019, initially my publisher was Simon Schuster, same one as yours, said, everyone in the world wants to interview you, Steve. We're pushing back the publication date because it was initially in the summertime. We're waiting till everyone gets back from vacation because everyone wants to interview you. And so it was pushed back to October 15th. And then when the time came, there wasn't media. There was some podcasts, but I expected to be on every major network. on every major show and every major magazine. And I said to the publicist at Scheinman and Schuster, what's going on? And she said, well, I have a friend who's in TV, and she confidentially told me the following. She said, if Steve Hassan thinks he can say that the Attorney General of the United States is involved with Opus Dei, which is a cult, and get on TV, he's got another thing coming. Because I
Okay.
wrote about William Barr and
Yeah.
how he was on the board of directors in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. Of Opus Dei. So it was like, oh, censorship, information control, the eye of the bite model, censoring critics. This is, again, mind control 101. So that's just the first of many stories I can share over this coming
Well,
interview.
I mean, we're just starting out with publicity for this, and I have to say the appetite to talk about this is huge. I mean, I've had so many incoming inquiries of late, so I'm hoping that we're able to kind of follow through and do as many of those interviews as possible. But what I have seen though is what someone described to me recently as litigation terrorism, which is, Opus Dei have hired some very aggressive lawyers
Right.
to go after any media that dares to give me airtime. Um, basically they want to shut down people calling them out. They want to shut down the truth.
Right.
They don't want people out there talking about what's really happening. But we're going to persevere with this. We know that the book is 100% correct. We know that we have hundreds of people out there who are willing to share their testimonies, their very real testimonies about what life is really like in Opus Dei. And, they can throw as much money as they want at the lawyers who are very happy to write aggressive letters to me and many other places. But we're just going to keep on talking about this. This is not going to go away through litigation terrorism.
That's why I'm so excited. And all I can say is when you're giving facts, people can make up their own mind regarding the facts. But to try to censor, it rises to the level of brainwashing and mind control the public. So now I'll give another story of my firsthand experience with Opus Dei censoring yours truly. I've been involved with a forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School for about 8 years because I realized the law is out of date with understanding what is brainwashing, what is mind control, what is undue influence. And I literally went and did a doctoral dissertation and did a study on it. And I was going to Rome to every 2 years is a congress of the world top scholars interested in law and mental health. It's called the International Academy for Law and Mental Health. And I had attended in Prague. The next one was in Rome. 3 days before I get on the airplane to go present, the organizer calls me and says, there's a problem. And I said, what's up? Well, there's a threat to cancel the entire Congress if you show up at all at the Congress. And I went, what are you talking about? Well, the organization, the Academy of Law and Mental Health, always pairs with a university that hosts and gives the facilities. Well, the head for ILMH was involved with Opus Dei, apparently, and they didn't want me, who wrote The Cult of Trump, to appear or to talk about there's a scientific way to now understand whether a group is brainwashing people, which is behavior, information, thoughts, and emotion. And I said, this is academic censorship. And they were like, we know, but we will go bankrupt as an organization if we can't hold this Congress. So we're begging you not to come. So I fell on the sword, so to speak, And I did subsequently speak at Lyon, France, and more recently in Barcelona at this august organization. But it was really Opus Dei that shut down my appearance, and it was showing the level of lengths that they want to suppress the notion that brainwashing and mind control exists in Opus Dei.
I mean, its tentacles run really deep into society at large. I mean, even as early as the late 1970s, they were writing to the Vatican to boast about how many journalists they had and how many TV stations and radio stations they had. Yeah, they had contacts at, or they had influence at. And the same is very much true today as well. I mean, in the US, for example, there are huge swathes of, especially the Catholic media, where Opus Dei is dominant, where they have a real voice. But I mean, the irony of trying to shut you down and stop you from speaking at this conference in public, and we can talk about the public and private side of Opus Dei shortly, but in public, what they say is that they're all about freedom of thought and freedom of opinion, but in reality, it's not that way at all.
Yeah, and that's why I tell people, don't listen to what groups say, look at their behavior.
Yeah.
Don't buy the PR. Another quick story, Boston Globe. I moved to Boston in 1977 to go to BU, Boston University. And they did a whole profile story on me, and any cult story that ever came up, they wanted to quote me, as a cult expert who was local. Then there was a period of 10 years where they wouldn't do a cult story, or if they did a cult story, they would call it a sect, SECT.
Mm-hmm.
The sect of Scientology does this or that. And I said to a friend who was in the music side of the Boston Globe, what's going on that no one's wanting to interview me anymore? Oh, the editor is Opus Dei, Steve.
Yeah.
That's another story, firsthand story that I can report about this. So let's come back to you and your research. So you find this bank, it's siphoning $1 billion plus to different entities. What happened next? What motivated you to continue to the point of wanting to write a book about this group?
Well, I mean, so first of all, I guess I spotted all of these financial flows between the bank and all these various Opus Dei companies and Opus Dei initiatives around the world. And I thought, this is already an incredible story. But in the middle of this reporting, something kind of serendipitous kind of happened. I mean, I saw this story in the news, initially reported by Associated Press, about 40 plus women in Argentina who had decided to go public about abuse that they'd suffered as these members called numeri assistants within Opus Dei. So these were basically, almost all of them were basically recruited into the movement as young girls. Some
children,
were 12
minors.
years old.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, let's call it for what it is. They were children.
Yep.
They were living in extremely kind of poor, impoverished communities. Opus Dei members would arrive in these communities and offer them a better life and say, look, we're going to take you to the big city. We're going to teach you how to cook, and we're going to teach you to do X, Y, Z. We're going to give you an education and a better life.
Right.
These kids were taken away from their parents, and, once they had them in these schools, they were basically then kind of pushed into joining Opus Dei. And many of them spent years, decades of their lives working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the organization with no pay, thinking that was completely normal. I mean, thinking that...
Well, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Absolutely. And only after leaving, in some cases many years after leaving, did they realize what had happened to them and how they'd basically been enslaved by the organization. And so I saw this story, and at first I thought, wow, this is interesting. Obviously, I feel very sorry for these women, but at first it seemed to have nothing at all to do with the story of the bank and the financial flows. And then one day in the archives, I found this document which directly linked money from the bank to this school in Argentina where these girls had been recruited into Opus Dei. And I realized that the bank was the financial engine at the heart of this recruitment network where children were being recruited into Opus Dei on false pretenses and then being basically coerced into a life of semi-enslavement.
Labor
Um,
trafficking.
Absolutely. Yes. And to that point, many of these girls and young women were moved around the world to meet the needs of Opus Dei. It was easy, I guess, for the organization to recruit these girls in poor countries like the Philippines, Argentina,
Right.
Bolivia, Nigeria. But where they were needed was in richer countries like Spain and the United States, where it was less easy to kind of using that playbook. It was less easy to recruit these
Right.
domestic servants, and so they'd be moved around the world according to where the organization needed them. And the organization, Opus Dei, would say, well, these girls came of their own free will when they moved to whichever country. But I argue in the book that actually they were being coerced. And according to the United Nations Protocol on Human Trafficking, giving your consent to being moved around the world doesn't preclude human trafficking if you're also being coerced at the same time. I mean, I'm sure you have
Right.
thoughts
Well, there's
on
lack
that.
of informed consent. And if you're a minor and you're basically maybe illiterate or your parents are good Catholics and they're being approached by impressive sounding and looking people who are talking about serving God, it boggles the mind to the average person that somebody invoking God could be doing evil and could be doing criminal activity. But that's the opposite of what I've learned about religious destructive cults because they think they're
Absolutely.
above the law.
And I think Opus Dei is particularly dangerous because it's it's been legitimized by the Catholic Church. So since the 1940s, it's been recognized as a you know as part of the
Prelature.
Catholic
Yep.
Church. But since the 80s, it's been because John Paul II was a huge fan of Opus Dei for very political reasons. He elevated Opus Dei to this kind of higher status within the
Mm,
church, which allowed it to operate outside of the normal diocese system, allowed it to almost operate as an independent church within the
right.
church. And then, critically, in 2002, the founder of Opus Dei was canonized. He was made a saint.
Mm,
He's now considered the saint of ordinary life. So, to ordinary Catholics, they see this organization as just part of the Catholic Church, something that's been
right.
officially sanctioned by the Vatican. And so they welcome the organization and its members into their homes. They're happy for their children to go along to Bible study camp or on retreat or whatever it might be, not knowing what's really going on and how the organization is actually a cult, actually an abusive cult that
Right.
wants to recruit and manipulate their children.
Right. Exactly. So, another quick story. So, a lot of people may remember Robert Hanssen, the FBI head of Russia intelligence, who was a Russian agent. When he was caught, William Barr was the AG, the Attorney General. And in the whole case, he said Opus Dei had nothing to do with his betrayal. It was all about money. But subsequently, reporters went and wanted to speak with Hanssen, and they had to get permission from Opus Dei to do an interview with him. And I'm like, Russia, right wing, cult of Trump. you
What we
know?
do know as well is that in the early 80s, after a few years of doing this for the Russians, um, Robert Hanssen's wife discovered what was going on, and she sent him to the Opus Dei priest to confess, and which he did. Um, and the Opus Dei priest told him, you need to come clean about this. You need to hand yourself in tomorrow. He goes home. The next day, he gets a call from the priest. Says, you know what I told you about handing yourself in? Actually, we're going to scrub that. You should just stop doing this. You should give them money to charity, and we should move on. You've got a family you've got a family to worry about. You don't. The last thing we want is for you to be off in prison. So this Opus Dei priest, knew about Robert Hanssen's spying from the early 80s, and Hanssen went on to spy for um, at least another decade, if not more. Um, and had the Opus Dei priest actually stopped things, had he kept to his original advice, then things could have been very different. I think um, we don't know exactly why that priest changed his mind, but I do wonder if part of it was about protecting Opus Dei's image. They knew that Opus Dei would get out. So they knew that Hanssen's membership of Opus Dei would get out. And the last thing they wanted was to be associated with this super spy. And in the end, the story did come out, but much, much later, after this guy had caused so much damage for the United States, and
Yeah.
after the information that he'd given to the Russians had led to the death of various agents as well.
Right. So you just taught me something I didn't know before. And I guess I surmise more, I don't know, critically, that this was done quite intentionally because they got orders from above, not just to protect the PR situation with the group, because they could have had him resign, and said, you're done, and go to go do penance and hit yourself with the salice, and you're done. But they allowed a foreign government to use Opus Dei to spy. And so for me, I can't help but wonder about this more criminal aspect of how, because one thing that the public needs to understand is a lot of state governments, whether it's China, Russia, the US, etc., they like to use religious cults to do dirty work for them, to have, plausible deniability. That's what happened with the Moonies. What I learned was that the CIA set up the Korean CIA, and the founder of the Korean CIA said he organized and utilized the Unification Church for use as a political tool. And this was under deposition for the House Congressional investigation. And I'm like, holy mackerel. We were worried about North Korean brainwashing. There were 2 coups in South Korea. They wanted to stabilize South Korea. And so they made the group that I got deceptively recruited into on the campus of a U.S. college for political brainwashing purposes.
Yeah.
That kind of sucks.
Yep.
So I have a serious question about that. Another quick story to add, because I know people are going to be very interested in your book. So there's a very popular book by Oprah Winfrey and Arthur C. Brooks, bestseller, called Build the Life You Want, The Art and Science of Getting Happier. There's one last story from Steve. Last year, I think it was, or a year and a half ago, I was recommended to take a leadership class at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Submitted the application, which had all kinds of endorsements and accolades for myself, and they never responded to my application despite calls and everything else. And then I learned Brooks is on the faculty at the Kennedy School. I could never say he kiboshed my application, but it was very weird that this book came out where he's proselytizing how much Opus Dei has changed his life in this Oprah book, and Steve not getting accepted to this leadership course at the Kennedy School. So I thought that was weird.
I mean, it's probably surprising to many people like that. It's not surprising to me because I've been researching Opus Dei for a number of years now, but it would be surprising, I think, to a lot of people, the number of political and business elite members who are members of Opus Dei. So you mentioned a guy that, Arthur C. Brooks, respected academic. He also was head of one of these political stroke economic think tanks. I forget the name of it exactly, but he was a pretty big figure in Washington for a while. More recently, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, and the guy that is basically the person behind the Project 2025 blueprint for America if Trump wins in November. He goes to the Opus Dei chapel in the center of Washington. He gets his spiritual direction from the Opus Dei priest there. There's people like Mick Mulvaney, who was the White House chief of staff under Donald Trump, member of Opus Dei. This is not an accident. I mean,
Right.
Opus Dei, throughout its history, has targeted the elite. Opus Dei's mission is to re-Christianize society, is to go into battle against the enemies of Christ, as it calls it. It sees these people as foot soldiers.
Yeah, air quotes on enemies of Christ, by the
Exactly.
way.
Exactly. And the way you do that, the way you change society, is by going after people who are powerful and bringing them into your organization. And so it's always gone after the rich and powerful. And so it's absolutely no surprise that a number of members of Trump's cabinet were either members of Opus Dei or allies of Opus Dei. People like Leonard Leo. He again he's on the board of the Catholic Information Center, which is Opus Dei's kind of main shop window in the center of Washington.
Yeah, that's what Barr was on the board. Same.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bill Barr is also on the board there. Pat Cipollone, who was the White House chief counsel, he's also on the board there. I mean, Opus Dei is a real kind of nexus for power, and they use the fact that they have been legitimized by the Catholic Church to draw these people in, and then they seek to influence these people in order to push through the kinds of changes that it wants to see in society.
Right. So I'm so thrilled. I'm going to hold the book again up, even though we have 20 minutes or so more. Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church by Gareth Gore. And it's going to be out in audiobook format as well as digital and print. All I can say is it's a great service, in my opinion, that you're doing and Simon and Schuster is doing, that they are backing the publication of this book, because a lot of things are driven by money and threats of, lawsuits and stuff. But I know, as with the cult of Trump, I was vetted by 3 different attorneys. I'm sure your book was heavily vetted as well, that nothing was said that shouldn't have been said, and everything that was alleged, and such. Tell us.
I mean, just to that point, I mean, I've been extremely lucky. Simon and Schuster have been so supportive throughout this whole process, and I'm very lucky to, other publishing houses, I guess, would have balked at some of the accusations that we're making in the book. Right. But you're absolutely right. This book has been through teams of lawyers. it's pretty watertight. We're very happy with it, and I'm sure Opus Dei will not be happy with it. But legally speaking, we don't
Right.
believe they have any claim against us at all.
Right. And so I want to add another perspective as a cult expert, because you invited me to share my experience of decades here, is that there's this error in the public's mind that only weak, stupid, uneducated people get into cults, or can believe blindly in some, cult, whether it's a religious cult or political cult and such. And Opus Dei, as you mentioned, clearly they have a lot of top people in various aspects, whether it's business or journalism and media. So I just want to emphasize, if people are listening to this and they have a relative or friend in Opus Dei, instead of saying, "Hey, here's a cult," just say, did you see this book? I would love for you to read it and tell me what you think about it, because we want people to think and make their own decisions. If they want to be part of an authoritarian criminal network, let them do it with their eyes open, but they
I mean,
shouldn't just, blindly believe.
to your point, Steve, I mean, they specifically go for educated people because they know that those are the tomorrow's elites. I mean,
Right.
but what they do is they target them from very young, and
Yes.
that allows them a way in. I mean, it's amazing. So the founder, when he started to recruit for Opus Dei in the late 1920s and early 1930s, he was very unsuccessful, but he learned quickly. And
Mm.
he wrote a manual for recruiting, which we partly publish in the book as well. And he spotted a number of things, which, you as a cult expert, you'll see these as red flags. I mean, he told his followers to not recruit anyone over the age of 25, because those kinds of people tend to be set in their ways, he kind of said. He also specified that members should never try to target more than one individual at a time. They shouldn't target groups. They should pick people off from the groups and target them individually. And the founder of Opus Dei, this so-called saint in the Catholic
That's a
Church,
scriba, right? His name?
Escrivá, yeah. So he was a master at this. So
Mm.
that there were testimonies of people who were targeted specifically by him. He would he ran this academy, which was supposedly kind of like a university academy. It was a place where they would offer extra classes for people who were falling behind in their studies or who just wanted to do particularly well. All the students would fill in questionnaires about their hobbies and their likes and things they were worried about or whatever. These questionnaires would arrive to Escriba, and he would find things on them and work out ways to target them. So there was this one guy who had put that he enjoyed painting. He was invited in to meet Escriba. Escriba presented him with this blank canvas and asked him to paint something for the school. And each day, Escriba would sit with him whilst he painted, and would basically work on him.
Yeah.
And today, in each Opus Dei residence, each of the so-called numeri members, are tasked and expected to basically be constantly recruiting. Each of them is expected to have roughly 15 potential candidates that they're working at any one time. And they collect information on these people. They share the information with the
Right.
other members at the residence. They
Right.
sometimes pass the information up to regional headquarters so that, things can be worked out. They have a checklist of, how the recruitment process is going. And, the methods they use are kind of typical to many cults. And I'm sure you can speak more about this. I mean, they spend the first part of the process is basically love bombing. So they become your new best friend.
Yep.
They invite you to meetings. They invite you to weekends away and retreats to like a ski camp that they might run in Vermont or whatever. And, slowly they kind of pick you off from your family, your friends, your group, so that they have a kind of monopoly on your interaction with the world. And once they've
Yes.
monopolized you, they bombard you with this Opus Dei propaganda. And eventually, I mean, the last step that people talk about is what they call a crisification. So when they think you're ready, they tell you, you have a calling from God. God has decided that he wants you to become a numerary member of Opus Dei. How could you possibly say no to God? And after you've lost your community, you've lost your family and your friends, you've got no one to turn to because you're now reliant on this group for all of your interactions.
Right.
And how are you to question the fact that God himself has decided that you need to do this? And it's at that point that people fall into the organization,
Because
and
people are
the process
groomed,
works.
just like traffickers groom people by
Yeah.
flattering them and finding out what buttons to push. And what you're describing is classic Mooney or any other religious cult recruitment tactics, where you're trying to pinpoint what are the buttons to push in what sequence. I remember back in 74 when I was being taught to recruit, I was told to categorize people as thinkers, feelers, doers, or believers. And if they were a feeler, then we would love bomb them. If they were doers, we would emphasize all the front groups that we had that were, supposedly doing good deeds for the world, etc. Or if they were a thinker, we would show the Nobel Prize winning scientists in the science conferences. So it's about, making a connection and then moving people down the conveyor belt into the cult. Explain the difference between a numerary and a supernumerary, please.
Okay, so 90% of Opus Dei is made up of supernumeraries, these are seemingly kind of ordinary Catholics. They're, ordinary men and women who live at home, they have kids, and, they go to work in normal jobs. That's the kind of public face that Opus Dei likes to present to the world. That, look, this is what Opus Dei is.
Yeah,
But
and they
there's
give a
also
lot of money.
They also, yeah, I mean, these people are also expected to give large amounts of money to Opus Dei, and often, as we said before, these people are from the elite. So these are lawyers, politicians,
Right.
journalists, doctors. Um, so that's the kind of public face of Opus Dei. But there's this hidden underbelly of the numeraries. So
Right.
these are people who have dedicated their lives to the organization. They've taken vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty. And these are the people that make the organization work. These are the people that recruit, but these are the people that also um, offer spiritual direction for the supernumeraries. So the way that they, I guess, groom or coerce or push the supernumeraries in the right direction to do the things for that Opus Dei wants doing, the numeraries give this every 2 weeks. They have this thing called the chat, or the confidence it's called in some countries, where the supernumerary meets with a numerary and is basically encouraged to, it's almost like confession, but not quite confession. They're encouraged to, basically pour out their heart, tell them about all of their worries and concerns and any big decisions that they're grappling with. And the numerary is there to give them advice. What the supernumerary doesn't know is that in many cases, the information that they're giving, this very personal, private information that they're giving to the numerary under the guise of Catholic direction, Catholic spiritual direction, is in many cases being passed on to other numeraries and to the regional headquarters in some
Up the
countries.
chain.
It's
Right.
being passed up the chain, and there are records being kept on each of the supernumeraries detailing all kinds of personal and private information. So yeah, I mean, so there's this public side, but then there's this hidden underbelly. So supernumeraries and the numeraries are the kind of core of it.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, that's what, I mean, just to go back to what you were saying before, because I find that quite interesting to hear that, you'd been recruited into the Moonies, but then you were turned into becoming a recruiter.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm kind of interested in how you processed that at the time, because I guess perhaps you weren't aware of that you were part of a cult, and you weren't aware of the
Of course
damage that.
not.
Yes.
Of course not.
So
Just
how did you
the
see the process of recruiting and like this checklist that you were talking about as well? I mean, how did you process that internally?
It's a very important question. Thank you for asking it. So in my books, Combating Cult Mind Control and all through the Cult of Trump, I talk about brainwashing as a dissociative disorder. In other words, you're born with an authentic self, and depending on when you're recruited, you develop an adult self, right? So I was 19. I had pretty strong values of what I liked, what I didn't like, what I was willing to do. I was a very honest person. I was writing poetry. I was a creative writing major. When I met the Moonies and they started hacking my brain, a new identity got created in the image of Moon and for God. And this new Steve thought he was satanic. The old Steve was evil. And I was taught not to think from man's point of view, but to think from God's point of view, because there was this bigger plan to save the world, to create the Garden of Eden on earth, God's original plan before Satan stole Adam and Eve away from God. And so whenever I was thinking for myself, that would be judged. And we had buddy systems too. You were describing a form of buddy system. In the Moonies, they called it the Cain-Abel relationship. And in the Moonies, you were a Cain to your superior who was Abel to redo the Garden of Eden where Cain killed Abel. So things were going to be reversed, supposedly was the theology. But to answer your question, my entire identity and belief system and language system, my entire sleep, I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, programmed me so that I thought the ends justify the means. I'm doing this for God. People are Satan's children, so we have to deceive Satan's children into following God's will. And so everything got justified or rationalized or wishful thought, or don't even question it. Follow Father, meaning the Messiah, and everything will be fine. So this kind of blind faith. And that's what's happening now with the cult of Trump. So many of the true believers are in these cult groups where their leader is saying, God said that Trump won the 2020 election. So it doesn't matter what the facts are. God knows because I'm the prophet and I speak to God. I hope that answers your question. I refer to the phenomenon as victimizer. I got victimized and then I learned how to victimize others.
And what you call the buddy system as well is critical to maintaining that as well. I mean, so in Opus Dei, the system is called internally fraternal correction. So basically, you're encouraged to tell on your brother
Yeah.
if they are doing anything that's not strictly within the rules, or that might be what they call bad spirit. They call it internally, and it's a way of purportedly it's a way of helping you to do your job better and become a better numeri and a better member of Opus Dei. But in reality, it's just another way of controlling you. It's ensuring that there's a whole network of control at the ground level, because they can't, the the upper members of the organization can't control or see everything. But
Right.
if they ensure that people are informing on each other, there's this system of fear and terror, right?
Yeah, and Hitler had the people do that. Children in the Nazi youth were turning in their own families, and in Mao's China, the same. This is not a new idea. I put it under the eye of the BITE model, information control, not just deceptive recruitment, but also tattling on others and only telling people what level they're at, what they need to know, because you don't tell the members below you that Moon had an illegitimate child when his theology is purity. But I knew
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So but it's very formulaic. That's why I want people to understand this is, if you take out the ideology, but you look at the process of how people are brought in, how they're indoctrinated, how they're given phobias, how they're thought to do thought stopping, etc. And that's how I came to write Combating, about groups I've never heard of. And people would read about the Moonies, and they'd be like, but you're describing the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons, and I'm like, if it fits, use it. And it does fit. And it fits Opus Dei.
One thing I'm particularly proud of with the book is that I think a lot of people have tried to call Opus Dei out for what it really is in the past, and obviously I'm having an attempt to do that again. But this time around, we got our hands on hundreds of pages of internal documents. So these are pages written by the founder of Opus Dei, this supposed saint in the Catholic Church, where he stipulates how to recruit people and how to control and manipulate people. So for the first time, we're shedding a light on the system, and we have the documents in black and white of, look, this is how it works. This is how the founder envisioned all of this. And, it's not just a few members who've become disillusioned with Opus Dei and decided that they hate it and they're going to give, all of these terrible stories about Opus Dei. We've got the documents in black and white. This is how it works. This is how it was designed.
Yeah, and it's so powerful to have the internal documents. I not only was a leader in the sense, not that I had power, but I was in the room hearing about these things, but I brought the documents out to give to the congressional subcommittee about how democracy was satanic and God wants a theocracy and how we have to infiltrate the government. And all I can say is I hope people who are interested, especially young scholars, they should do like parallels between, Escriba's, methodology, the Moonies, the Nazis, Mao, and others, so that the public can understand there's a paradigm here of how to capture people's minds and bodies and use them and exploit them for the aggrandizement and financial gains and power needs of these malignant narcissists who are basically... Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, one very interesting aspect of the existence of these documents as well is that, I mean, in my view, Opus Dei as an organization is trapped by its own narrative. So the story is that this Spanish priest, Jose Maria Escriba, one day in 1928 received a vision from God for Opus Dei, and over subsequent years he wrote down this vision in meticulous detail. And these are documents that are going to be coming to light. In the book. Now, the fact that this system, this abusive system of control exists in writing, and the fact that Opus Dei tells itself and tells its members that this vision came directly from God, puts the organization in a bind. It can't wash its hands of the documents because these supposedly come from God. It's akin to the tablet that Moses brought down from the mountain, right? I mean, these are, this is the vision that God showed to Escriba. It can't change anything about the way it operates because that's to put into question this vision.
Yeah.
And so I don't see a way out for the organization, really. It's going to be very difficult to reform itself because you can't, because it's stipulated in black and white that this is how we abuse and control people.
So to push back on that, when the internet came out, people took documents from the founders of the Jehovah's Witnesses and put them online and compared what the group was saying today about what was going on earlier on. And droves, millions of people left the cult. Same thing with the Mormons, because they were victims of their own documentation and history. Didn't shut either organization down, however, but it definitely caused tens of millions of people to exit. And because the internet exists, and now you're talking about Reddit, ex-member groups forming, etc., I'm hoping your book will help more people to come out with more information about illegal criminal activity, to clean their conscience at the very least, but also to counter this right-wing conspiracy to destroy the separation of church and state and democracy and impose this authoritarian vision on everybody else.
Yeah. No, I hope more than anything that the book kind of gives people the courage to either leave Opus Dei, or if they've already left, to interact with other members to ensure that people get the help that they need. And also, this goes without saying, I also hope that the book helps prevent more people from being drawn into the organization. I mean,
or any occult organization,
or any
from
cult
my
organization,
point of view.
absolutely. I mean, but Opus Dei is, has a presence on dozens of Ivy League schools across the United States. It operates high schools. It has a plan to expand its high school network in the United States to almost every state. It's gearing up for a big expansion in the United States, and I hope my book is able to nip that in the bud and to.
Yes, me too. Opus, the cult of dark money, human trafficking, and right-wing conspiracy inside the Catholic Church. Gareth Gore, financial journalist. I did put Opus Dei in the cult of Trump in chapter 7 as one of the cults that were part of the cult of Trump. So anyone who is concerned about Trump's and Heritage Foundation's 2025 plan should read Gareth Gore's book and invite him for podcasts and for media interviews, please.
And just as a final thought as well, if there's anyone out there who's still a member of Opus Dei and is watching this, and this is prompting them to maybe rethink things, I would very much encourage you to get onto the Reddit group, and we can share the details of that in the notes to the podcast. But there's a lot of people on who've been in similar situations to yourselves who can offer advice and help on getting out and restarting your lives.
It's great. And self-plug, you can come to freedomofmind.com and read what I've written on Opus Dei and check out Combating Cult Mind Control, because Opus Dei is not in there. I don't have an ex-member's story. Or do I? Do I have Eileen Johnson's? We did an update. I have to double check it. But in any case, thank you so much for doing this book. And I hope it sells millions of copies and is a bestseller and gets translated into 1 million languages. So thank you, Gareth Gore.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Steve.
Pleasure. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.